We're on. Should I say something? Hey,
Hi, Roy. How are you?
we're good, Lauren, Chairman Smith. I was just given word that we're on and live.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Good.
Hello. How's everybody?
Somebody kicked me out a couple of times there. Good. Thanks for joining. I'm sorry that caused a little grief there, but looks like we have a decent crew on. And so I call this meeting, the intergovernmental meeting, to order. And well, there's many folks here, so if you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, we'll get started with that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Could I have a motion to approve our agenda?
I don't know if you can hear us. Jeff, can you hear us?
I could not. Now I can. Keeps coming and going, so I apologize. We better get over this quick. So we had a motion, second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Hi.
Great, thank you. And do we need to suspend Robert's rules? Can I have that motion as well, real quick?
Make a motion to suspend Robert's rules.
Thank you. We have a second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. And before I mess anything else up, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Commissioner Shainfeld and walk around and try to find better Wi-Fi. So, Commissioner Shainfeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So tonight we are here to have a discussion around bonding. Alan Matzloff is here with us. He's with Stiefel, and I have asked him to speak to us about different bonding options, what that might look like. I know the city of Green River has voiced that they didn't know, they were not leaning towards bonding. I have been reached out to by some of the smaller entities who are interested in bonding, and we can discuss some of that after Alan goes through his presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Alan right now to talk a little bit about bonding in general, and then we'll have him answer any questions that we may have, and then we can have some discussion about moving forward. And this is for the specific purpose tax initiative that we've been working on, gosh, at least since January. So, hey, Alan, take it away.
Right. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for letting me talk to you all for a few minutes. So in the conversation we've been having over the last several months, there's been this discussion about whether you just wait for the money to, come in on a monthly basis and spend it as it comes in, or do you borrow, fund projects up front and then repay that borrowing with the revenues that come in each month. So I'll just give a couple kind of pros and cons for both options. So the biggest con against borrowing money is it costs company. So you have to pay for interest on that borrowing. And as you all are familiar, it's been a bit of work to get the, there are more projects than dollars, let's put it that way. And so for every dollar that you pay in interest, that is a dollar that's not available, right, for projects, right? If you vote a dollar amount, right, some of it goes to interest. So that's the biggest con about borrowing money. One pro would be that you have money earlier, so you can do projects quicker. So that might be something to think about if you had projects ready to go and wanted money in hand. The other reason that you might consider borrowing is then it's a little bit less complicated to prioritize which projects get money first, right? So one of the options with cash funding, right, which is waiting for the money to come in each month, is to give a proportionate amount to each of the entities and for each of the projects. Alternatively, sometimes I've seen it where, a certain project gets funded first and another project's funded second and third and fourth in that order. So, so on the bookends, right, you have borrow as much money as you can, and you have borrow no money, right? Those are two options. And then you have what's in the middle, which, borrow some amount and cash fund the remaining. So that's something you consider. Are there two projects that you could fund right away and you borrow dollars for that and the rest are funded over time? So just to give you some context, this is a 5-year tax, so you could borrow for 5 years. And assuming an interest rate of 3%, which it'd probably be a little less than that today, but if any of those folks on this call watch the interest rate market, we've seen big increases lately. So let's assume 3%. For every $10 million borrowed at 3% for 5 years, there's an interest expense of about $900,000. Okay, so just to give you some context, that means that if you borrow 10 million, there'd be $900,000 that you wouldn't have for projects. If you borrow 20 million, it would be 1.8, right? 30 million, 2.7, right? It's proportional. Now you do have some interest earnings on that money before you spend it, but it's not as much as the interest you would pay on borrowing. So to give you some idea. One other thing I wanted to mention, and this would occur in any scenario, is the money will come in on a monthly basis from this tax, and then it'll be distributed. But before it's spent, right, there's an opportunity to earn interest on that money. And as interest rates go up, as they have been going up for the last several months, that means that borrowing costs have gone up. But it also means that you can earn more on that money. So just today, so I'm sure every one of you follows this, on a daily basis. A 1-year treasury bill reached 3%. So compare that to what you've been earning on money in a bank, right? So that's real earnings that can help. So even if there's regardless of whether you borrow money or don't borrow money, there's a little bit of extra there that can be earned on interest, which is a nice benefit as construction costs go up and things get more expensive, and there's a constraint on how many dollars that could be available. So there's no right reason, right answer, borrow money or don't borrow money. I think it depends on what the projects are. And it really depends on whether you have projects ready to go. One other way that some people evaluate this, I'm not sure this is the only way to evaluate it, but it is one way to evaluate it, is to compare the borrowing costs, so this $900,000 over the 5-year period for each 10 million, as I mentioned, versus inflation cost. If you had to wait 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to build a project. That's something that some of my clients are doing. They're thinking about that comparison, about how quickly can we build something or not. So that's really the analysis. It's not terribly complicated. borrow money, don't borrow money, evaluating when you want the money and whether you want to have an interest expense that will reduce the amount of money available for project. So stop there. Yeah, Lauren, you're not, there you are.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, are you okay if I jump in with a question?
Feel free, question away.
Perfect. Okay, so this has been something that's been brought up, is that both the city of Rock Springs and the city of Green River have smaller projects underneath their, their overall specific purpose tax request. And so they would potentially be able to divvy out what those requests might be and do, one street at a time, things like that, which is good because of construction costs at this time. However, our smaller municipalities, they have one project and it would take them 5 years to get enough money to complete that one project, in which case the amount of money that they're bringing in for the tax is potentially, with inflation, is potentially not even going to cover what they needed. And so plus 5 years is it's a long ways to wait for some of these projects that are really in need of getting completed. Is there any option for us to assist those smaller communities and not bond with the bigger communities? And this has been asked to me over and over again, and I know we've had a lot of discussion about it. So I just wanted the larger group and the recording for the community members to have the response to this.
Right, thank you, Commissioner. So the option there is to not borrow money, but fund those smaller projects first with the cash that comes in. Right, so you could pick a couple smaller projects and say, okay, the first, and I know the list is still being worked on, but let's say there was a project that was $3.5 million. Okay, but the estimate that I got from the county treasurer is that this tax would generate about $17.5 million. So, if it's a $3 or $4 million project, maybe that's the first couple months of the tax could go to that first project. So you could put an order in, that way the smaller communities can do their projects and the other ones could be done over time. So that's one way to do it. One thing I want to mention is another downside of borrowing, and I'm in the debt business, so I have a lot more negatives than positives here, apparently, in this presentation, but is that if you do borrow money, then obviously the first dollars have to go to repay the borrowing. So that money's, there'll be extra available for projects, but it does put a priority in place. So I think that's one way to do it, is to say, we want to fund these these 3 projects first. The first dollars go to those projects, and then we'll allocate proportionally after that.
Thank you, Alan. I guess, Mr. Chairman, are you good with opening it up to questions? If there are any.
Absolutely, and I'll start. So Alan, I understand that we can do that. We could prioritize that. That doesn't really answer the question of could we? We don't have to bond the whole thing.
Correct.
We don't have to bond the whole amount. If we wanted to bond 5 or 10 million of it or whatever, we could. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but I was trying to say in that second part of my statement was but then you're still prioritizing, right? Because you're paying that back. So maybe it's not enough to make a difference, right? Maybe it's a good balance. But yeah, you could borrow for those smaller projects, or just fund them first, or borrow for another. I don't know. You have all those options. And this is more of a legal question, and I didn't go to law school for a lot of reasons, but the questions I've worked on, some did not have bonding language in them, and then the financing was done as a lease, and then others had bonding language in it. So that's a question for the legal folks to figure out whether you have to make that determination now, or it could be figured out later. With this short tax period of 5 years, borrowing money becomes less and less efficient as you move forward, right? So it's not like in year 4, you want to borrow money because that's only 1 year. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Go ahead, Commissioner Shanefield, and if you see questions or if anybody has questions, feel free.
Yeah, are there any questions for Alan?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question, Lauren. Alan, can you explain one of the reasons why I think bonding, as we've done in the past, makes good sense is we also have the ability to utilize those resources for marketing and that portion of it. So can you explain if we bonded a portion of the projects, those projects which weren't bonded, they'd be on their own in regards to the marketing, promotion, the like?
Yeah, I mean, so if you bonded a portion, let's say, half, because there's some portions like that, you'd have dollars that came in every month. The first dollars would come in and make the bond payment for the year. So let's say that's $1 million $10 million. And then the other $7.5 million would be available for all and any project, how you decide to allocate it. So, that's one of the challenges is that if there was a shortfall, if there was some sort of economic activity which caused that revenue stream to decline, then there may not be other money available for anything else at all. So that's the risk, right?
Right.
I mean, it's the same risk. It's really the same risk, right? If revenues decline, then you have less money. That's just what it is.
Right.
But when you borrow, every dollar then goes to the borrowing and very little would be available for other purposes.
Alan, I think one of the things that we haven't talked about is your support, and this is something we haven't discussed a lot even in our committee meetings, but your support of moving forward with the marketing and the information, public information around the projects. Is that what you were asking, Tim, Mayor Como?
That is what I
Okay.
was asking.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really do. You mean for the election, or
Yeah.
Yes.
we don't really have that service. George K. Baum and Company, my former employer, which got acquired by Stiefel,
Right.
worked on the last 2 elections, had that service, but we don't have that, unfortunately. So, I can provide, analytical support and numbers and be happy to get on calls like this. But in terms of like doing the public policy or informational campaigns, we don't have that.
We would have to utilize TurnCore, which is who helped with the survey and everything else.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I
And then the
apologize
other-
for this. Not
No,
understanding.
That makes sense. Then the other question, Mr. Chairman, Lauren, are we using 17.5 million generation a year?
That was last year's number. And we use that to base off of the less than 5 years, 5 years or less. If things increase the way we expect them to, with the Trona industry and everything else, in previous years, it's been upwards of 20 million a year. And so we could cut that down a fairly significant amount. But the top amount, if we had the last year's income tax revenue, it would be 17.5. Yes.
Okay, I was just wondering where we got the 85 million. If we use 17.5 million for 5 years, you're at about 87.5 million.
Yeah, if I may, the conversation we started was just about, we kind of rounded down to 17 because it was like
Gotcha.
17.3
Okay.
something. And if you look at the history, it's gone up and it's gone down, and we were trying to find that middle point. And then The latest date, I think, was about 17.5. So
That makes sense. Okay, thanks.
ish. I guess the answer is ish. Not a great answer.
They're trying to play it a little more on the safe side than not.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Well, I don't know. I like the idea of bonding. It just was cleaner and like I said, gets us started on projects quicker. We could sit down and decide for the smaller communities on what projects we could get done first to get them moving. I'm not quite sure, and maybe Sherry, Councilman Bushman has ideas about their bonding. I'm not quite sure where Green River stood on that, but all in all, I think bonding the projects makes more sense to the city of Rock Springs.
That's what I've heard from our small municipalities. They're very concerned about having to wait 5 years, what that inflation is going to look like. The projects that are the priority projects that are on our list were the priority projects 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when we pulled it from being on the ballot. These things are not going away. They're not getting taken care of. And the longer we wait, the worse it's going to get and the more expensive it's going to get. So all of the smaller municipalities that I have heard from would also like to bond. Sherry?
Hi, sorry.
Hi.
So I know Brian's on the call. I know that for a fact that Green River is not interested in bonding. Obviously, we have our waste treatment plant that we're contending with at this point, which is our big ticket item. So Ryan, do you want to give a little bit more details on that?
Sure. So, yeah, as Sherry mentioned, in general, the city of Green River is not really interested in bonding at this point in time. It's just an additional expense. We think, some money that could be used for projects that would be paid in interest. And I think part of the issue is we're looking at a timeline on which at least our projects, and I obviously can't speak for the rest of the municipalities in the county, are going to take a little bit of time to do some design and engineering kinds of aspects. And in fact, I've heard, I don't know the truth of this, but that in the past, there has been times when we bonded these projects and we had to actually pay penalties because we weren't ready to use the money in time to get the projects moving forward because there was some design and engineering. So the timeline that we thought we had was a little bit aggressive and we didn't really need that money. And then in addition to that, we just recognize that there's also some potential, and we certainly understand the small towns and other projects, but we think there's an opportunity to at least consider things like the state revolving funds, mineral royalty grants, and various other sources of funding that are applicable to some of these projects. And for a number of those folks, particularly the small towns, there's some principal forgiveness potentially. So, and maybe some ARP and various things rolled into that. So in fact, you could borrow at a low or lower rate and have some principal forgiveness on top of that. Now, maybe that's not applicable for everybody, but I think it's a discussion where we can really multiply those dollars. But really from the city's perspective, I think we're just looking at timing. It's going to take some time to get everything completely ready to go.
Speaking of that timeline, once if we are successful, the money starts rolling in. What is the deadline to have projects done, completed? There was some issues with that before.
There is a timeline on getting them completed.
Well, the money has to be spent by, I know there's a date and I'm not quite sure what that is at this
Oh, are
point.
you talking about ARPA?
No,
I don't think there's a date on specific purpose.
If you borrow the money, then there are IRS rules about how quickly you have to spend the money. If you
Got it.
don't borrow the money, then you can
Right.
spend it, I don't know, whenever you want. And the rule, just for the group, is you have to reasonably expect to spend 85% in 3 years.
3 years, is that what it was?
But you don't have to spend it in 3 years. And the quote penalty discussion is really, it's an arbitrage calculation. So if you borrowed at 3% and you earned interest more than 3%, then you would have to pay back that difference. But you're supposed to spend it, most of it in 3 years, but it's just an expectation of spending it.
Okay, I just want to make sure we were clear. I just remember some criteria there last time that we had to have expended those funds in a certain amount of time and want to make sure that's.
Yes, and that is another, plus, I guess, for not borrowing. Gosh, I have a lot of good not borrowing reasons. Is if the project's going to take longer, then that money can just accumulate and earn interest, I guess. But again, it still might be a some of one, some of another approach.
Can I make a comment, Mr. Chairman or Commissioner Shanefield? That was part of the issue last time. I mean, the last tax was passed in 2012. Funds started rolling in 13. They called off the tax in 18, and officially the funds stopped coming in 19. I think the biggest issue with that and those projects that weren't completed were that it just becomes kind of a nightmare to track and to figure out, the remaining requisitions for the Joint Powers Board. They just kind of hang there in limbo until those projects can be completed, and who's governing that or ensuring that the money's going where it was intended to. So I think that was part of what you might recall, Mayor Como.
Yeah, that is, Counselor. Lauren, I think your mic is not working if you're speaking.
Is this better?
There you go.
All right. I don't know what's up with my mic. I have to change it consistently. Are there any additional questions or comments? We are going to be having a committee meeting. Gosh, I'm hoping we can do it very shortly to get everybody on the same page. There is a draft resolution that is almost complete. It is with the county attorney's office right now to make sure that I didn't miss anything, and then it will go out through the committee. So be expecting that to get everybody on board, making sure we didn't miss anything, making sure project summaries are correct. And then I think the last and final decision before looking at the resolution is deciding bonding, yes or no. So please have these conversations with your councils and get back to whomever is representing your group on the committee. And if there's any additional questions too, Alan, I'm sure will be available to answer anything via email. I'm more than happy to send anything to him. So,
Lauren, can I real quick? So Alan mentioned the legal that the bonding, some places, if I understand, needs to be included in the resolution. Some places doesn't. Do you know if ours is one? Does that decision have to be made before the resolution's written?
so in the past, and I think for transparency reasons, it would be very smart for us to have it in the resolution before. I mean, our taxpayers and our voters need to know if we're planning on including that in the whole process. So that's my take on it. The resolution that is in draft form right now does have the potential. I actually have it grayed so that we can delete it if everybody decides they don't want to bond. I think that at this point in time, there's more municipalities than not that want to bond. And so we just need to look at maybe the amount and have some discussion around that, just from what I'm hearing today around bonding. So
Great point. Yeah. whether it's legal or not. Yeah, we should let everybody know what we're doing. So that's great.
Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Shanefield, I do have a question for Alan really quick, if that's all right. Alan, so you were talking about interest expense, but the underwriter's discounts and the issuance costs, that is all in the first year paid upfront as well, correct?
Correct.
I know it wasn't an insignificant amount last time we issued bonds back in 13.
Correct. So you have those expenses as well, which is less dollars for projects.
So I guess my question along with that would be, so do those, I know the interest expense is a percentage. Do the issuance costs, do they follow that same percentage as, so if we bond a lesser amount, would the issuance costs follow the bond, or is it more of a set amount?
Yeah, so if I were involved, my fee is a percentage. That's kind of how we get paid. But the attorneys, bond attorneys and things like that, they usually have a flat fee. So that may adjust a little bit with a larger amount, but probably wouldn't change too much. But yes, if you borrow less, generally you will pay less in expense.
All right, thank you.
Your mic is not working.
Anything else?
I think Lauren was talking, but I didn't hear.
I said anything additional, and then Jeff said anything else. So we're on the same page.
So I just, Mr. Chairman, Lauren, I was just at the next meeting, your committee meeting, will we then make a decision then on bonding or not, or portion of that's the goal?
That's the goal.
There's several that aren't online here today, but I'd imagine their representation will be able to at least make that decision and move forward.
Yes, and I've heard from a few. They had emailed me that they would not be able to make it today, but they did wish to bond the smaller entities, and so hopefully they'll be able to be on the committee meeting. I was just looking at the total amount if we didn't utilize full bonding, what we could look at, and I think a couple of options would be in order. Mayor Como, I will be sending out a draft of the resolution for everybody to look at. It's not super specific on the language of bonding. It does have the interest therein and a few other things. And so our attorney, John DeLeon, is looking at that right now. I will send it to you all this evening, recognizing that it is in draft form and that it will need to be, obviously there's going to need to be a lot of changes and adjustments, and everybody needs to look at it and approve it. But I think the longer we have to look at that and make sure that everything is how we want it to be and the language is correct, the better. So that'll go out, and any input on what that language needs to look like. I've taken the previous ones as well as a joint one and kind of combined them all to make sure that we had everything included. All right, Chairman Smith, I think everything on my end is completed.
Sounds good. Alan, thank you for your time. Appreciate you being here and helping us out a little bit and refreshing our memories from times past. It's been a while, and so greatly appreciate that. And we may have some other questions down the road. And thanks, Commissioner Shanefield, as well.
Happy to help regardless of what direction you go, and let me know.
We absolutely will, I promise.
Thank you.
With
Thanks,
that,
Alan.
and no other business before this illustrious body of great minds, could I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
And a second? Thank you.
Second.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.